Welcome to the DK Kim Foundation lecture series offered by the Center for Asian Business at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California. This program is funded by a grant from the DK Kim Foundation in Ontario, California.
It's great to be back at my school, LMU, so I'm honored to be back. As Professor said, Doctor said, my name is Marisela Caraballo DiRuggiero. I'm a Director of Trade Development at the Port of Los Angeles. And most of you this morning, when you got up, did you think about when you were getting dressed and what's in your rooms, what's in your homes, that everything that you have, what you're wearing, came from another destination? If you looked at your tags in your clothes, most likely they're made somewhere in Asia. If any of you are getting materials for your school, you're getting a new gadget, they're all coming in on container boxes. So most people don't think about it because it affects their daily lives. If you look at the furniture, the TVs, the patio furniture that you may have at your home, or if you get a new barbecue grill, all that stuff is being imported and it's making its way to a local store near you. But most people don't think about ports and the activities of the economy on a daily basis. So before I get started into my presentation, I'm going to show you a quick 3-minute video, kind of give you a quick snapshot, and then I'm going to go a little bit over into some of the details of how we operate and the impact of trade.
Welcome to the Port of Los Angeles, the busiest container port in the Western Hemisphere. Los Angeles is America's center for international trade, a global model of innovation, security, and sustainability. Welcome to America's port.
The Port of Los Angeles, 7,500 acres, 27 terminals, 270 berths, 43 miles of waterfront. More than 50 container trains daily, 22 million local consumers, nearly $1 billion of cargo per day, 86 container cranes, almost $300 billion in annual trade. Continuously improving upon efficiency, speed to market, reliability. As the gateway to connectivity, the Port of Los Angeles has committed hundreds of millions of dollars to ongoing capital improvements. Main channel depth of 53 feet. Big ship ready and serving the largest vessels in the Trans-Pacific trade. Progressive terminal and backland improvements. Continually advancing future technology. Expediting goods to 14 major U.S. freight hubs. By water, by rail, by truck. Goods movement through the LA Trade Gateway is fast and efficient. The caravan of cargo never stops. Supporting the cargo trade that moves through the nation's busiest container port requires the most skilled, efficient, and reliable labor force. A longshore workforce over 14,000 strong. Fast ship turn times. On-dock rail capability at every container terminal. Reliable and professional truck drivers. World-class leadership delivering our customers' needs for tomorrow, today. The Port of Los Angeles is at the forefront of environmental change in the port and maritime industries. A catalyst for green technologies. World leader in shoreside power for cargo and cruise ships. World's first clean truck program. Significant air and water pollution reduction.
The Port of Los Angeles offers shippers unmatched capabilities. From the large volume of cargo our terminals can process, to having North America's largest port workforce, clean truck fleet, on-dock rail network, and regional portfolio of warehouse and distribution centers. Above all, we take pride in our ability to deliver exceptional value to our customers through strong relationships across the global supply chain and our focus on technology, sustainability, and land asset utilization.
We're here to enable your business needs, and that's our commitment to you as America's port.
All right, so that's just a quick snapshot of who we are and what we do. But just to go over a little bit of the details, the slide you see before you is an image of the San Pedro Bay Port Complex. If you notice, we're actually comprised of two ports, LA on one side and Long Beach on the other side. Most people ask how come both ports don't combine and become one megaport. Quite simply, the politics of it all. Neither city is willing to give up its biggest asset. So the city of LA isn't going to give its port to Long Beach, and Long Beach isn't going to give their port to the city of LA. So we do work together when it comes to transportation infrastructure projects, security, and the environment. But when it comes to business, we are fierce competitors with one another. We take each other's business. We actively work with the shipping lines and the beneficial cargo owners to ensure that that cargo comes to our port. So a little bit about our governance and our history. We were founded a little bit over 100 years ago in 1907. The state of California entrusted our lands at the Harbor Department to the city of Los Angeles. Under the city of Los Angeles, I am an employee. I work for the Harbor Department, but worldwide, we're known as the Port of LA. We are non-taxpayer supported. Basically, we are a department. We're one of three in the city of LA that are non-taxpayer supported. It's us, airports, and DWP, the Department of Water and Power. So we generate our own funds because we're a landlord, and we operate our business like a business. We operate it like a business management of landlords. But we are overseen by a 5-member board of harbor commissioners that are appointed by our mayor. So typically whenever we have a new mayoral election and we have a new mayor, we typically get a brand new leadership team. So the positions to be on the board is also very political because you are appointed by the mayor. We encompass 7,500 acres of land and water, over 270 berths, 27 cargo terminals, but our bulk of our business are our major 7 container terminals. And we have 91 ship-to-shore gantry cranes. Those are the big gantry cranes you see that are offloading the cargo off the container vessels. We do have our 3 main areas of focus at the Harbor Department. One is business, that is our #1 focus, but we're also focused on the environment and the community as equals because we are surrounded by communities of Wilmington and San Pedro, so you have people living close to the Harbor Department. So we also have a community sector that reaches out and we do a lot of development with our local folks. Last year we handled 9.5 million TEUs. A TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit container box. What you typically see being hauled on the back of a truck is a 40-unit TEU, but globally they're still counted in 20s, so that's how we also count them as well. Our main line areas of business, we also import vehicles, we import steel, liquid bulk that goes to the local refineries to turn it into gasoline so folks can drive. During the winter months when California isn't producing fresh fruits and vegetables, we're importing that from South America and primarily Chile. We also have cruises that come in and out of the harbor, so you can take a cruise to Mexico or to Hawaii. We also have a lot of visitor serving centers, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well, but the main bulk of our business is TEUs. And then when we're talking about scrap metal, that's one of our biggest exports. So our port ranking by the millions of TEUs in the Western Hemisphere, we are #1. Last year we handled 9.5. We're followed very closely by our neighbor in Long Beach, who handled 8.1 in 2018, then followed by New York, New Jersey, then we go to Panama, then we go to Savannah on the East Coast, Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, Canada, Manzanillo, Mexico, Hampton Roads, and Houston. If you look at us globally, we are handling, with our neighbor in Long Beach, 7.5 million TEUs in the San Pedro Bay Complex. Now, when I started at the Harbor Department almost 2 decades ago, we were ranked #3, just to show you how quickly China is developing. So we went from that #3 spot to that #9 spot in just under 2 decades. So the largest port right now that's moving containers, that's the number of containers, is Shanghai in China, followed by Singapore. Then we go back to China to Ningbo. Then we go to Shenzhen. Then we go to Guangzhou. Then we go back to Hong Kong, or we go to Busan in South Korea. Then we go to Hong Kong. Then we're back to Qingdao. Then there's LA Long Beach. And then there's Taizhou in China. Now that #10 spot used to be held by Dubai. They just got knocked out by Taizhou last year. So once again, that's how quickly China is developing their ports. Now, my cargo marketing guys are going to tell you the way China counts their containers is a little bit kind of different than the way we do it in LA and Long Beach, because we are a destination port. The goods come from Asia, they come to us, and they get distributed to the rest of the nation. If you're going to one of these other ports, Shanghai or Singapore, a lot of these ports are feeder ports. So they're getting that cargo from other smaller ports off a smaller vessel. It's being offloaded that ship. It's being transferred onto another ship. So those ports in Asia are counting that container twice. So in LA and Long Beach, we only count that container once. Even if it were to be transshipped, we would only count it once. So if you take a look at those numbers, they can kind of vary it a bit. And then if you look at the monthly TEU counts that are kind of like the chart at the bottom, you kind of see towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year, we saw an increase of cargo coming in from previous years. And that has to do with folks trying to beat the tariffs. And we'll get a little bit more into that. But when the tariffs went into place, they kept saying, the tariffs are coming. The tariffs are coming. Okay, they're going to get implemented on this date. Then they were extended. Then they were extended. So people were trying to get in all that cargo in before those actually got implemented. So it's no surprise that our top trading partners is China, Hong Kong, followed by Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, and Taiwan. Our largest imports is our furniture, our auto parts, our apparel, everything that you're wearing today, the footwear, and electronics. Our biggest exports, waste paper, animal feeds, raw cottons, going into new fabrics, soybeans, and scrap metal. So our economic impact regionally and nationally is quite large. In our department, we just have a little bit over 800 employees. In the San Pedro Bay Port Complex on any given day, we may have 10 to 15,000 longshore workforce working there. We account for 1 in 9 jobs in the region. If you look just in LA and Long Beach, we account for 1 in 12 jobs associated with port activities. Our trade value throughout California is just over $89 billion. Across the United States, our impact is just under $3 million at 2.8. And we touch every single one of our congressional districts. And throughout the entire United States, over $311.5 billion of trade value. And why do I talk about the congressional districts, the 435? Because we are in California. And when we go back to DC, some members of Congress don't want to meet with you unless you're one of their constituents. Well, I can get into any door in DC because we represent their constituents. So I do a study every few years that talks about the biggest importers and exporters in each congressional district. So if I'm going to go meet from that congressman that's out in Michigan or Minnesota, or the congresswoman in New York or Florida, and they happen to be chair of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee or Homeland Security, they're going to take the meeting because we do have an impact on the goods that are coming into their district as well. The impacts of trade, the impact of tariffs on trade. This slide just kind of shows you comparable from 2018 to 2019, kind of a base value. So our imports from China have declined 8.2%. Our exports to China have declined 21.2%. And China bought less soybeans by 96%, glass by 81%, rubber by 74%, grains by 71%, scrap metal by 63%, fruit by 58%, logs and lumber by 35%, and automobiles by 31%. That's quite a significant impact of the tariffs. And then when we're talking about the tariffs, the ultimate person who's going to be paying for that price is not the companies in China. It's going to be you, the ultimate end user, the consumer. So when you go to Target and you're going to buy that $20 shirt, that $20 shirt now is $25. If you're going to buy a washer and a dryer, maybe that washer and dryer was about $500. Now it might be closer to $800. You're going to end up paying for that. What we've also seen is a growing shift in trade from Asia. So for imports, we've seen an increase of imports coming from Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And we've seen exports to Singapore increase and to Malaysia increase. I meet with a lot of international delegations at the port, and I am meeting more and more and more with folks from other countries in Asia that are looking to take the opportunity because China can, the prices have increased with the tariffs. They're looking at it as a growth opportunity for them to manufacture. If you're doing clothes, you just need to move your sewing machines. That's kind of simple enough to set up. But if you're doing big machinery, maybe the cost to reposition your company in another country may not be so simple. Then there's a cost of labor, and those also get taken into account. So we had a record-breaking year, but partly it has to do by the larger calls of ships, and I'll get into that a little bit further in the presentation. But the threat of future tariffs on Chinese imports has been the main driver for our increase of cargo. So even though we've had a good year, and even this year has been good, with the threat of those tariffs, we're seeing the surges of that cargo coming in. So LA and Long Beach continue to be a gateway connectivity. We are a mega region of 22 million consumers here in Southern California. We have a very strong longshore workforce in the port complex to be able to move that cargo in and out of our harbor. We have over 1.8 billion square feet of warehouse distribution centers in a 5-county area. Right now, those distribution centers and those warehouses have less than 1% of space because folks are stockpiling their goods to beat the tariffs. So if they continue to import those goods, they're going to have to be finding probably more warehouses further out than the Inland Empire. We can handle up to 100 trains daily in and out of the harbor, but on any given day, we handle about 30 to 50 trains coming in and out of the harbor. We have 2 major class railroads, Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and we have access to every major freight hub in the United States. So Chicago, Memphis, San Antonio, Kansas City, New York, Atlanta, Houston, Denver, and Dallas. And what I really like about this slide, it kind of shows you how cargo gets transported throughout the United States. So you have a ship that's leaving leaving Shanghai. It's going to take 13 days for that ship to sail across the Pacific to arrive to the Port of Los Angeles. Once that ship arrives at the Port of LA, it arrives at 8 in the morning. By 12 midnight, that cargo terminal has offloaded part of that vessel. Because we have on-dock rail, that means we're able to build trains directly onto the terminal. A train has already been built by midnight, just about 2 miles in length, about 700 containers, and it's on its way to Chicago by midnight. That's on day 1. A big ship takes anywhere between 3 to 5 days to offload. Once that train is on its way to Chicago, it's going to take 5 days to reach there. So day 18, it arrives in Chicago. By day 20 and 21, the goods that arrived to Chicago have been distributed to a store in that region in the Midwest. So by day 21, people already have access to those goods. If you're going to sail a ship through the Panama Canal, you're still in the water because it's going to take 25 to 26 days to reach the East Coast or the Gulf of the United States. So when it comes to shipping cargo, we're still the choice of where people want to send their cargo to because we're more efficient. We have the transportation infrastructure because we have invested heavily into our infrastructure and into our port complex to be able to handle that trade. But there's other ports around the United States and in Canada and in Mexico that are looking to take our cargo because about 50 to 60% of the cargo stays in Southern California, but 40% of that cargo is what we call discretionary cargo. It goes to other parts of the United States, and that 40% is the cargo that we're all fighting for. So when we're talking about keeping that cargo here in Southern California, that's the battlefield for us. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the Trade Connect program at the port. One of our missions is to increase exports through our port complex. So we created an educational business center so we can show small and medium-sized businesses how to export. We put on workshops for free. We look at it as market diversification for businesses. 85% of businesses that are manufacturing or producing are not exporting. They're only keeping that market here domestically. So there is a huge opportunity for those companies to expand if they go to foreign markets. And that's something that we do with our workshops. We also work with other sectors in the federal department, so the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Commercial Service, the Export-Import Bank of the United States, also known as EXIM, and the U.S. Small Business Administration to show businesses how these federal departments can give you a loan, help set up meetings in other countries, show you what's needed in a bill of lading. That's the paperwork that you got to do when you're going to be sending exports. Is the cosmetic, perhaps, that if you're producing a lipstick, is it going to be viable in a country? Are the contents in that manufacturer product, are they allowed into that country? These are all the questions that most businesses have to deal with. So through the workshops and giving them exposure to the various exports, we are showing small and medium-sized businesses how to export. We also do international outreach with trade. So we talked about the port being an influence driver. Not only are we a landlord port and we're moving cargo in and out of the harbor, but we also have an influence on other ports, because since we are the largest port in the Western Hemisphere, people all the time want to come and meet with us to see how we're handling our business. How did we do our infrastructure? How are we working our environmental programs? How are we handling security? So we do a lot of diplomatic outreach with other countries, and a lot of countries come to visit the United States, always want to meet with us. Just yesterday morning, I was meeting with the Minister of Commerce for the government of Bangladesh. They're looking to do more trade with Los Angeles. They're seeing the tariff war as an opportunity for them to be able to manufacture more goods and give a viable option to folks buying goods in the United States to buy from their country. So what has changed? In this picture, you kind of see what the port used to look like in the early part of the turn of the century. We didn't have big container ships. We had sailboats. We didn't have containers. Cargo was moved by the strength of men, literally lifting that cargo off of ships and carrying it off on planks. And today, we have container ships. But vessels are getting larger, not only in length, but also in width. So that means the port, we're constantly improving our infrastructure. So the ships are getting taller, they're getting wider, and they're getting longer. That means the big gantry cranes that's offloading those container ships also have to be able to offload those goods. So even those gantry cranes are getting larger and taller. We're also seeing a very big growth of ships. So in this picture, you see the CMA CGM Benjamin Franklin. That's an 18,000 TEU vessel. That ship arrived to us in 2015, the day after Christmas, December 26th. And for us transportation nerds at the Harbor Department, we were very, very excited. I admit it, I am a transportation nerd. So we were all there, along with our mayor, our member of Congress, our county supervisor, our local city council member. When that ship arrived, we were all there to receive that ship. It was a beautiful sight. It is a mega, mega ship carrying 18,000 TEUs. Now you see the little ship in the background, kind of looks like it's tugboat, but that ship actually carries about 8,800 TEUs, which used to be the average size container ship when I started working at the port just almost 2 decades ago. But it is dwarfed by this massive ship. So we've seen an increase of ships getting larger, 57%, or 13,000 TEU or larger. Earlier this spring, we received our largest vessel to date, which was a 20,000 TEU vessel. So the ships are getting larger, they're getting bigger. It's more efficient for folks to put more containers on a ship because less ships have to make that trek across the Pacific. We've also seen an industry alliance reshuffling. So 20 years ago, if you were the Maersk shipping company, you only called at the Maersk terminal and you only carried Maersk containers. Now it kind of looks like Legoland when you're at the port because you see all the different color boxes, and companies, similar like the airlines, made alliances. So now on the one alliance partner, you'll see ONE, Yang Ming, Hapag-Lloyd. They're in the alliance, so they're sharing terminals, they're sharing ships, and you see various containers from them. Evergreen is sharing with Costco, OOCL, APL, CMA, CGM, and Maersk is partners with MSC and HMM. And these agreements are in place. These agreements have to be ratified by the federal the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Maritime Commission in Washington, D.C., and sanctifies these alliances. So in 2022 and 2025, we'll probably see a reshuffling of these agreements, and the Federal Maritime Commission, once again, will take a look at those. We talked about infrastructure. At the port, we invest quite heavily in our capital improvement projects, $1.7 billion over a 10-year period, which pretty much equates to about equates to about $1 million a day we are investing on infrastructure projects a day. So each one of those yellow dots you see on the screen represents an infrastructure project that we're currently working on and is part of our 10-year capital improvement plan. And the reason I talk about the capital improvement program is because people think we have all this cargo coming in and the port is a huge department, but we spend the bulk of our money right back into our own infrastructure. We also invested, along with the City of LA, City of Long Beach, Port of Long Beach, and the County of Los Angeles, in building the Alameda Corridor Transportation Authority. If you're flying into LAX and you're sitting on the right-hand side of the plane and you happen to be looking out as you're approaching, and you see like this big giant corridor that looks like a big giant zipper, that is the Alameda Corridor. It's a 20-mile trench. And it basically goes from the ports down in the south, just to the north of downtown Los Angeles, to the two main yards for BNSF and UP railroads. And it was very important to build this project. The project was built and opened in 2000, but prior to that, you had rail lines cutting through 9 cities between the Harbor Department and northern Los Angeles. So what happens when a train's about a mile in length and you gotta wait for that crossing and you're at that light waiting for that train to go? You're sitting there for about 15 to 20 minutes. If there's an emergency in any part of the city, fire department can't get there, paramedics can't get there, police can't get there, and if someone's having a medical emergency, they can't get to that hospital. That is the difference between life and death. So working with the various cities along the corridor, and the 2 major cities and the 2 major ports, along with the county, worked to build the Alameda Corridor Transportation. During this project, we reduced conflicts at 200 grade crossings. We added nearly 100 miles of new track, and we created new grade, about 50 grade separations that separated vehicles from trains. This is just kind of an overview of the map of the corridor, so you can see where it goes from the harbor all the way to northern Los Angeles. And inside the trench, you have 3 tracks, and those trains can go in either direction depending on what's needed for that trade that day. And we talked a little bit about the environment, why it's a focus for the department. We talked about infrastructure and how important it is, and how we're spending close to $1 million a day on infrastructure projects. So imagine, for 7.5 years, we were not able to build one infrastructure project at all. Because in California, there's a thing called CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. Anytime we're going to do a major infrastructure project, we have to do an environmental impact report. Under CEQA, anyone can challenge your EIR report. And guess what? We were being challenged. We were constantly being sued by the environmental justice community. So every time our Board of Harbor Commissioners approved a project to move forward and City Council approved it, we were being sued. So both ports kind of came together and said, we need to do something to address this, because we're not an air regulatory agency. We're a port authority. We're landlords. We lease land. Ships come. We have terminal operators who lease the land, and they operate the goods coming in and out. We have the rail infrastructure that the locomotives are coming into. We have the roads that the trucks are coming into. But we have no authority over any of those mobile sources. But we did have one thing. We had leases. So if you're going to do business at the port, we wrote into your leases that you're going to use the cleanest, greenest equipment on your terminal. Only the cleanest trucks can come into the terminal. And we targeted the various equipment that comes into the harbor. So we targeted trucks. We looked at ships. We looked at locomotives, cargo handling equipment, and tugboats. And both ports came together and had a meeting. The last time they had met together was in 1926. So in 2006, both ports came together and approved the Clean Air Action Plan. And when we did this, it was very controversial. You had the business community, who are our tenants, who pay the rent, telling us that we were going too far, that we're not an air regulatory agency. How can we do this? We're imposing cost on them to buy more expensive equipment, more costly equipment, and the environmental justice community said, we didn't go far enough. So our board and our management said, okay, we got it just right. Nobody was happy with us. Fast forward 5 years later, we did Clean Air Action Plan 2.0, and by that time, buying the cleanest and greenest equipment became the normal business procedure for our terminals and our tenants. And they started buying the cleanest equipment. The trucks that were coming into the port were US EPA compliant 2007 at the time when we implemented the Clean Air Action Plan. Now they're 2014, 2018, and we're looking at alternative fuel technologies. Now in 2017, we adopted the Clean Air Action Plan 3.0. And once again, we're at kind of that controversial stage again, where we're pushing the limits on technology, because some of the technology doesn't exist yet. Zero emission trucks doesn't exist yet. But we're looking at zero emission technology. So we're asking the community, we're asking the producers of this equipment. So we're working with Toyota, we're working with Volvo, Tesla's out doing testing, we're doing demonstration projects, and we said, look, we have 7,500 acres. Come test your technology here at the port. Let us be your pilot program. And that's exactly what we're kind of in the middle of. So in our 2017 Clean Air Action Plan, once again, we're looking at trucks again. We're hoping to go to near zero technology trucks by the year 2035. So we're going to be testing some of that technology. By 2030, we want to transition to zero emissions technology on the terminal equipment. For ships, we're looking at ships to go cleaner and greener. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Our tugboats and also the locomotives. So for ocean-going vessels, we have a voluntary program called the Vessel Speed Reduction Compliance Program. So 40 nautical miles out, just as they're cruising around the Santa Barbara coast, we ask them to slow down. Similarly, like if you're driving on the 405 and you're going 80 miles an hour, but if you slow down to 55, you're just kind of cruising, you're producing less emissions. Same thinking goes to ships. We're asking them to slow down. So as they're coming in, they're emitting less pollution. We're also using at-berth technologies. So when a ship comes in, they turn off their diesel engines, and guess what? They're plugging into shoreside power. Just like I did my hair dryer this morning to blow dry my hair, ships are plugging into shoreside power. So while they're in port, they're not emitting those emissions. Right now, it's 2019, and we have a 75% compliance of those ships calling our port actually do plug in. Now, that technology didn't exist almost 20 years ago. So we've been doing a lot of testing. We were one of the first ports to actually pay for a ship to be retrofitted in 2002. We invested $11 million in a ship operated by China Shipping at the time, and we did the first, we call it alternative maritime power vessel. Now it's common practice. The bigger ships that are being built today, they are being built with that technology already in them. So there's no alternatives that you have to do. You don't have to modify a ship. Once that ship is built, it's in service for a good 30, 50 years, depending on that ship. We're also looking at the trucks. So we are pushing for zero emissions by 2035. Now, those trucks do not exist because those trucks have to be able to pull heavy containers, and they have to go to the distance. So if you're a trucker and the goods are staying within a 5-county region, you're probably going about 200 miles within Southern California. If you're going to go past 200 miles, then your goods are going on a train. We're also looking at transitioning to improve truck turn times in the terminal. What that is when a trucker arrives at the port and they're going to pick up a container, they have to pick it up on a large terminal. The footprint of a terminal can be as large as 500 acres or 300 acres. It can take you 20 minutes to get from one end of the terminal to the other end of the terminal to pick up a container. So we're trying to improve those truck turn times to get them in and out of there in less than an hour. We're also looking at terminal equipment, and we want to transition zero equipment by 2030. And we're looking at technology development. Actually, in the springtime, Toyota is going to be bringing 10 hydrogen fuel trucks, and we're going to be testing them right at the Harbor Department. So both ports are investing quite heavily into the Clean Air Action Plan. And at the end of the day, it's about having cleaner air. And if you look at the baseline from 2005 to 2017, we have reduced emissions significantly by looking at these different technologies and working at these targeted specific cargo areas. So we reduced sulfur oxides by 98%, diesel particulate matter by 87%, nitrogen oxides by 60%, greenhouse gases by 10%, all the while our container volume has increased by 26%. Now we have reached some of our 2023 goals in the first 3 categories, but that is still not enough because the greenhouse gases hasn't reduced significantly, and that's the battle, is in the greenhouse gases. So we're hopeful with some of the new goals that we have implemented in the 2017 Clean Air Action Plan that we will get there. But for us to get there, that means the cargo still has to come to the Port of LA, because the money that we generate, we invest right back into the Harbor Department. So if trade goes elsewhere, then we become an economic disadvantage in the Harbor Department, because then we don't have those funds to invest into our infrastructure. What's also important for us is our process management. So we've been looking at digital technology to improve efficiencies within the maritime sector. Believe it or not, just a few years ago, if a ship was coming in, that terminal operator didn't get the manifest for that ship until 2 days prior to its arrival, even though that ship already had sailed almost 2 weeks prior. But that's just how the shipping industry was. They're very antiquated. Now there's an app for everything. You can look on your phone and see how a Domino's pizza that you order is going to get delivered. You see it being made, you see it in the oven, you see it on its way, and then it's at your door. Well, we kind of want to do that for the shipping industry and be able to track that cargo in a similar way. So our executive director worked tirelessly for several years, meeting with the different supply chain stakeholders, and said, we need to do something to improve our efficiencies, because sometimes we're just slow. The terminal operators get stuck. They don't have enough truckers to pick up the goods. They're not building the trains fast enough because they didn't realize that ship was going to come in and needed to build 5 trains out of that one ship. So we started with a pilot program, 1 shipping line, 1 terminal operator, a few trucking companies, a chassis provider, and said if we can make this work. It was a very successful pilot program, and from that pilot program, we implemented the program throughout the entire port. About a year and a half later, our neighbor in the Port of Long Beach said, we want to be part of your program as well. The Harbor Department invested a little bit over $13 million into this digital footprint. So we worked with the cargo owners, the marine terminal operator, the ocean carrier, the modal carrier, the railroads, and the chassis providers to be able to feed this information. And prior to this being implemented, it took us about 2 years to work with U.S. Customs and Border Protection for them to allow to give us manifest data that was redacted, so it wouldn't interfere with their security protocols, but so we can process that information into a digital platform. So now you went from a 2-day view to plan your workforce, your labor, how many truckers you need, how many chassis you need, how many trains you need to build, to now a 14+ view. And in some cases, we're getting up to a 38-day view. So it's improved the efficiencies quite significantly. Security is also very important at the department. We're very fortunate that we have our own port police force. So we work on public safety, homeland security, and emergency preparedness. So we have very many structures of overlay at the Harbor Department. We have the U.S. Coast Guard that's on Terminal Island that has their LA Long Beach Coast Guard base there. We work with U.S. Customs and Border Protection since they inspect all the containers coming in and out of the department. And we work with other agencies at the state level, the county level, and the city level. We also have a threat detection center, which is very important since we do have a very large footprint. And we also have a cybersecurity operations center. We were the first port to implement one in 2014. And why is this so important? Because that is the way folks are hacking. They're destroying businesses by hacking. Believe it or not, our little department that's just a little bit over 800 employees, we have over 20 million intrusion attempts per month. That equates to 7 to 8 attempts per second. And we're just one department. So our folks at the Operations Center, they can see where those attacks are coming from. So we work with the federal agencies to stop those threats, and those threats don't go in and compromise our security system. In 2017, Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, was attacked with a non-Petya virus. One of their employees received an email. They opened up an attachment. It looked like an official email that coming from, looked like their federal IRS department. It looks like a form. It was somebody in their accounting division that they would have to fill out. And when they opened up that document, it infected their entire computer system and their servers globally. So it cost Maersk over $400 million to recover from that cyber attack. And that was just one incident. After that, we've seen attacks at the Port of Barcelona, Port of San Diego. Costco Ocean Shipping Company was also attacked. So this seems kind of like the new way of folks, of hackers. They're trying to stall you. They're going to say, we're not going to give you back your servers until you pay up that ransom and that fine that we want from you. Port of San Diego refused to pay that fine. They rebuilt their system, but they suffered for it as a result. You know, it took them a while to do so. So we're very fortunate that our executive director and our leadership had the foresight to implement this system. So our department is secure, but that doesn't take care of the rest of the supply chain. So that is something that we're also working with. We're trying to implement a new cyber resiliency center so we can work with our supply chain partners in the maritime industry. And our maritime industry partners, a lot of these companies are foreign owned. So they don't want a federal department like the FBI looking into their servers. And we're not saying we're going to look into your servers. We're just saying we will be the host, we will build the system, but everybody can report into it. So if you're being attacked or you feel like your system is being compromised, let us know that email, that IP server, and then we'll distribute it to the rest of the supply chain partners and let them know, be on the alert for this type of email, be alert from this type of server, so we can kind of be like a safe haven to prevent cyber attacks. The telecoms industry does this, the banking, financial institutions do this, but we do not have this in the maritime sector. So our executive team is working very closely with the federal government, hoping to get some federal funds so we can build this system. It's not going to be cheap. It's going to be probably about 13 to 20 million to implement, but that's something that we're willing to do so we can secure the supply chain. So we didn't talk about a little bit earlier, what happens when the supply chain stops? Let's say we have an interruption of service. Back in 2002, we had a labor lockout with labor. They went on strike. They went on strike for 9 days. Now, the West Coast labor force here is not just LA and Long Beach. It is the entire West Coast. So that's every port in California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and Hawaii. They shut down the economy for 9 days. It was so bad that at the time, first President Bush enacted the Taft-Hartley Act and said, workforce, you go back to work. Because you had companies in Michigan and Detroit that weren't getting their products in. So they had to shut down the factories because they weren't able to build cars because they were waiting for those auto parts to come in from overseas. At that time, in 2002, it cost the economy $1.5 million a day. If that were to happen today, that number would be closer to the billions, because that is the impact of the economy, because on goods delivery. Most people don't realize it. People produce their goods, they ship them in, and they go into a manufacturing base in somewhere in the United States to be built. So cybersecurity is very important, so we cannot afford to have 1 day of being shut down. The cost to the economy would be too large. We also have a Maritime Law Enforcement Training Center at the Harbor Department. It's not only used to train our own port police officer how to navigate in the waters. Chasing a suspect on a boat is very different than chasing a suspect in a car. On land, you're not dealing with water, with waves, with winds, with a rocky situation. And not only do we train law enforcement for ourselves, but we also do law enforcement throughout the United States and globally as well. U.S. Coast Guard trains out of there. Our U.S. Navy SEALs train out of there. Our Marines who safeguard our embassies abroad also train out of there. So it's a great resource to have this in Southern California. We're the only law enforcement training center associated with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center on the East Coast. And we partner with the federal agencies to make sure the classes and the standards are there for law enforcement. Then I'm just going to wrap up a little bit about our community. Since we are surrounded by a community, we work on building a buffer between port operations and the community. So if you come to the Harbor Department, you're going to see a buffer. Right there you see what I call our Bellagio fountain. It's a fountain that was built by the same folks that built the Bellagio fountain. It's got a water show synchronized with music. During the holidays, they put Christmas songs and holiday music there. During the regular year, it's kind of an international songs that play to represent all the cultures here in Southern California. We also have Alta Sea, which is associated with 11 colleges and universities in Southern California to do marine research at the harbor. They've utilized old warehouse space that's no longer utilized for container service, and they're doing research on aquatics, marine life, tsunamis, how it affects the region. And we're also building our waterfront. That's a picture of the Wilmington waterfront. Here is a design of what it's going to look like in the near future. We will be breaking ground next year on the Wilmington waterfront. Similarly, some of you guys are too young, but for us older folks in the room, we may remember Portugal down in San Pedro. That used the place we all used to go to. There's a very famous fish market there that's still there. People go there for the weekends and order big fish platters. But that area has, needed a little bit of TLC. It's getting a facelift. So the new Portugal will be called the San Pedro Public Market. And these are just some renderings of what it's going to look like. And that's the quick overview of the Port of LA, and I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have. We do have many layers at the Harbor Department. We have our own police force, which is our local police force. We also work with county, also our neighboring police force, which is the City of LA and City of Long Beach, and also the State Department, the various agencies, so CHP, county sheriffs, and all the federal agencies that oversee us. So after 9/11, what we saw during 9/11 is people were not coordinated. Everybody kind of had their piece of the pie, and it was like, who was in charge? How can we communicate with one another? Because everybody was on a different frequency channel. So at the time, the captain of the port, who was heading the U.S. Coast Guard, implemented a Area Maritime Security Committee and called all of the law enforcement agencies to start working together. During that time, they used to meet once a month. Now they meet on a quarterly basis. But since that inception, they put in emergency situational awarenesses on how to evacuate the port, who would be in charge under different incidents and commands, how the different law enforcement agencies would respond. A little bit over 4 years ago, we had a fire at the Harbor Department. One of our warehouses was being retrofitted. One of the wharfs was being retrofitted underwater, and it sparked a fire. And because we have those training exercises, everybody showed up to respond to that fire, but there was a definite incident command. People knew who were in charge, and everybody was able to communicate with one another. They also trained for various different scenarios. So for an earthquake, for example, a tsunami, for example, a terrorist threat, an incident where a helicopter could go down or an airplane could go down in our waters, what they actually have, or a boat, a recreational boater can collide with a container vessel. So they do those types of training. So it depends on the situation, we'll determine who's in charge. I've never heard of a ship not making it to port. So similar like the air traffic controllers, that monitor all the airplanes when they leave and then where their destination is, we also have a similar program operated by the Marine Exchange, partly Coast Guard, is also a nonprofit, and they track all the vessels. So if you were to go on their website, you could go on their website and you can see all the various vessels that are in transit. Now, they do have a bit of a delay, similar like the airports do, but you can track the vessels. So I've never heard of a vessel not making it. Now, if you're referring to some of the pirating that takes place in the off the coast of Africa and the Gulf, that's a whole different issue with pirates. But those ships are not lost. They're still tracked. Accidents do happen. Sometimes when ships are crossing the Pacific, there's a big storm. It's called Mother Nature, and a big wave will crash onto the side of the vessel, even though that ship is massive and the containers are pretty much bolted in, kind of like Legos, and then reinforced with steel cables. I have seen ships that come into the harbor, and you can see them tilted, and they've lost containers at sea. But those containers are not really carrying hazardous materials that are on top. So there's a different of categories of where containers are placed on a ship based on what they're carrying. Now, let's say we have an incident where a ship that's in port, all of a sudden they're being refueled, because when you're a container ship, you don't go to the gas station. The gas station goes to you kind of in the form of a barge. The barge will come up next to you, and they'll hook up the big cables, and they'll start pumping you with your fuel. Every now and then, there could be a spill or could be an incident. In our port complex, we have a hazardous material team and a ship that's there just in case we have an incident. They can go out there and comply. Luckily for us, we don't. However, U.S. Customs and Border Protection does. So they are the ones that track every single one of those containers. So before a ship leaves its its last port, let's say it's somewhere in Asia, they have to provide their manifest 24 hours before they sail to U.S. Customs and Border Protection. While it's en route, Customs and Border Protection is reviewing the ship's manifest, and they will determine which one of those containers have to go to secondary screening and which one of those containers have to be opened and go to an off-site location for that container to be open. And that's how they do find a lot of counterfeit goods. We do find people, unfortunately. Usually with people, you can kind of smell it because they've been in a container for over 2 weeks. And if you're in a container, there isn't a bathroom on a container. Usually it's a bucket. And they usually transport, it isn't 1 or 2 people in a 40-foot container. There's usually about, anywhere between 20 to 40 people in a container. So those are, you can pretty much tell when that container, the longshoreman can tell you what's in there. But U.S. Customs and Border Protection has that authority.